To kick us off, you guys, so I wanted to kind of just
Mm,
open it up. I know we've been going really in depth right now. Um, I wanted to actually zoom out a little bit. So I want to go around the panel right now. And my question for you is, I think most of you have kids, or when we think about the next generation, right? When we zoom out 50 years and we think about our kids growing up and living in this age, in this era, um, what like bit about AI excites you the most about their future? And then also what makes you the most worried right now?
mm, mm. Yeah, I've got all four of mine are solidly in their 20s. And off the payroll, notably, which is nice. That's great stuff. And
How does that work?
they're finding their way, right? Which is all really good. I think what I think a lot about is just how much smarter we could be using these AI tools. Like there's an acceleration of knowledge accumulation and interaction with the right large language model or set of them that we can just be so much smarter more quickly, more knowledgeable more quickly. And so if you don't have to, I think you mentioned, Megan, did you mention microfiche on your talk? I mean, you went way back there. Like there's way back, but like, the idea of research, is so easy now, assuming it's accurate and it's not being hallucinogenic on you, right? You have to fact check it and make sure it's right, multiple sources, sometimes go to the source as well. But the acceleration of knowledge and insight for my kids is right in front of them. But the other thing is the thing that's scary is if they're not doing that, they're going to lose their job, right? There's very little chance, unless they want to be a lifeguard. But even then, there'd be robots for lifeguards. I don't know. I just don't know how, that you can really be successful in a white collar job of any kind without using AI and standing out as someone who's accumulating knowledge as fast as your peers to do the job itself, right? Or to solve a particular problem. So those are the two sides of the same coin, Jenna. That's what I would say.
That's
Um,
good.
I'll jump in and Mark, I'll let you end up too because I I will say so I have a 16 and a 21-year-old and the 21-year-old is going into nursing, so I think there's a whole bunch of pieces about that. But I to what and my 16-year-old is between engineering and a host of other things. And I think especially engineering or mathematics or all of those things, the um we have no idea what AI is going to do or look like for that sort of cohort of people. But I think the same thing that excites me for my kids is what excites me for like the teams, the junior teams that we're pulling up, and that side is just if you think about the volume of pieces that we worked on that were just busy work, that just the inefficiencies that we had, the number of things that we just wanted to throw our computers out the window for or any of that, I think that their ability to streamline and do trained well, those pieces, high value work that actually gets you thinking and has you learning as opposed to sort of that rubber stamping of just sort of getting through that. I think that's really curious and all of the applications about how we solve serious human problems. If you think about healthcare, it's one of the biggest sort of locations where people are talking about the ability of AI to advance health research, even, or any of those things, and connect sort of the different data structures together to help really accelerate how we're solving illnesses and major complex problems in healthcare or even environmental science, like all of those things. So I think that's the exciting part is the opportunity that we have to make the world better, I guess, but to transform things in a way that we couldn't do before because the technology wasn't there. I think the converse of that is that at its core, AI is two things, right? It's only as good as your data model. So that hallucination or those pieces, I think there's a nuance around like you're starting to even read from HBR, right? Like Harvard studies that, the language is now crawling itself. So there's less sort of, poetry in the world or original thought or that side. And I think the other thing that you see longitudinally though is there's no morality in AI. There's there's nothing about that. It's a binary system. And so the AI strategy, AI in, in the world will only be as good and as powerful and as moral as the people using it and the people deploying it. And I think that that's a challenge that will be one of the elements for this generation. I think is how do we make sure that there are the right guardrails on AI to drive productive change and transformational change and not sort of, the Dr. Evil sitting in a room, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, hard to follow.
Sorry.
No, no worries. I also have a couple in their 20s, and they're wildly different. One's a software developer and the other's in theater production. So sort of two ends of the spectrum. I think what I hope for them overall is actually not just at work, but even in their home life, that AI automates all the boring, grungy, there's just a lot of admin to life that would be great if it just went away and you could spend more time with friends, more time doing fun things, whatever it is you love to do. So I hope that is where the world gets to. Um, I have to say I'm pretty worried about I've been in the Valley for a long time, and most large tech winds up, especially lately. Somebody described Facebook as a ad-supported dopamine machine. And I'm afraid AI might head that way too. If you look at ChatGPT and what they're trying to do, it seems like maybe one way they could make a lot of engagement happen is by becoming your therapist and becoming your best friend. And boy, do we need guardrails on that. It just feels like not a great direction. So that's what I worry about the most. And I think, if you're watching some of the lawsuits out in the public against OpenAI these days, you'll see some really horrifying examples of where that could go wrong. And yeah, so I hope we have the strength as a group to put the guardrails in place that are needed there.
Mhm. It's kind of a crazy time. I saw Jay Shetty. I get his newsletter, and he was like, "Is AI spiritual? Will it be spiritual someday?" And it's just like there's so many different potentials that we're going to see coming out, and I think, yeah, it's going to be really interesting just to see what happens. So it's kind of fun and exciting to think about the possibility too. We're like at that tipping point right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one more question for all of you, just kind of general, and I'm curious your angles on this. We saw a huge shift in 2025 when it came to bringing AI, kind of learning about AI. People are finally starting to really build it into their businesses with more intention. But what do you predict will change specifically from a consulting business model in 2026 compared to what we saw this year?
Who wants to go first?
You want to go the other way around?
Okay. What I hope happens in 2026 is that I feel like 2025 was a lot of hype and a lot of noise and a lot of angst because of the hype and the noise. What I hope is that we start to hear a lot of very concrete examples. There was one in the breakout room I was in where somebody could give a very concrete example where they've removed about 20% of the staff from their firm and yet their revenue is higher. And I imagine one level beneath, we didn't get time. I wanted to ask about that, but like, what specifically are the roles that you were able to automate? And like, is it a whole role gone, or is it just you used to need 10 people to do this across this many clients, and now you can do it with eight, but they're all still doing similar things? So I hope that we get to these very concrete examples of this job used to look like this in terms of hours per week or per month, and now it can look like this. So that person can handle more clients or they can handle more activities. We get a lot more specific, and and the savings and the benefits really become more clear. That's what
Yeah,
I'm hoping by the end of next year.
I agree. And I think we hear that a lot. We work with ServiceNow, so we're exclusively focused on a large enterprise system. And both the sort of teams and the customers really want to understand what are those business use cases. So, not, I think sometimes, we've been talking a lot about, AI has to be part of your strategy, but sometimes it becomes that sort of, if anybody remembers Wall Street, like we're still talking about the features and functionalities of what AI can do. So sell me this pen and it's the right color blue and all those things instead of what does it drive, why you need this and those pieces. And I think there are huge, what Mark was talking about, really, really fascinating use cases. We have one client that we're working with in Mexico. So it's the largest sort of pharmaceutical, but shop, so franchises, and they've changed their sort of franchise onboarding. Not Mexico doesn't always have, especially in more rural areas, the best infrastructure on that side. So emails going back and forth and Wi-Fi going down and those pieces, that onboarding to get a new pharmacy into a region moved from 3 weeks to 3 days. And so just because of the sort of like normalizing of like automating all those systems so people can do asynchronous work and those pieces. And so that there are a lot, I mean, imagine how much more you can get just in using those pieces. So I think that's one of the big ones.
Yeah, got it. That's again, now that I'm last, that's hard to follow. I understand, Mark, what you're saying there. I think you know, I think about it a little bit differently, probably because of this new seat I sit in. For me, having ridden the ERP wave, then the CRM wave, then the cloud wave, and now this one, there are enough pattern. This is structurally different, no doubt. Like it is structurally different in many ways, but the patterns still pervade. And what I would like to see for 2026 is from a macroeconomics perspective, Andy had that chart, or somebody had that chart about just so much uncertainty in the market. Having a little bit of certainty so that companies feel comfortable stop hoarding their cash and investing again. And when they do invest, right now they're investing in AI, kind of AI only, in pilots and those kind of things. So it's really hard for a services business to grow. Now there are some that are growing. There's some that have figured it out, that are doing very well in the market. Kalent's doing very well because it focuses on AWS. It's a very partner-centric motion, like the same way Meghan talks about focusing on one platform like ServiceNow, right? So there are businesses I know of several boutique services businesses focused on Salesforce that are growing again. So there's some things snapping into place in the economy if you obsessively focus and choose. Um, but I like to see the macro market feel stable enough so that CFOs and CEOs of these mid-market enterprise companies that we want to serve unlock more spend, because it's really hard to run experiments in the market without buyers, right? And so we need more volume of buyers to grow the business a bit more so that we can compete and win. The other thing I think a lot about is like what are going to be the patterns emerging of which of the large language models are companies going to buy? Like companies have made their decision to buy workflow systems. They've generally chosen ServiceNow as their workflow engine, right? Generally, companies have chosen Salesforce as their CRM, whatever, right? Or they've settled the ERP market's massively settled down. But who are going to be the winners to serve the enterprise so that we know how to serve our clients with those, as well as I think the final thing I'll mention for 2026 is, it's really not optional for a consulting firm to not rewire the way it does its own work around using AI to do their own work, which is a bit different than those other ways I just mentioned. And so understanding, Mark talked about a bit ago, the patterns you might identify in terms of resource savings for the client, and all the way into the back office of a small to medium-sized consulting business has to use AI to be AI native, inside the guts of the business. So those are the things I think are going to pan out in 2026 and probably 2027.
I would also add just on that, I think there's a lot right now that we're starting to see on AI readiness. So everybody wants to do AI, but I also think that there's a host of, I think I talked earlier about it's only as good as your data, your underlying data structure or that side. And so I do think that there's a lot of messiness in there. And so actually helping companies get through that change management process that is, are you organizationally, do you have a data strategy ready? What are your guardrails? And then also like, what's that? How are you going to evolve your teams? And if you're consulting to enterprises like that, there's so much sort of strategy consulting and change management. I think strategy consulting has been one of those things that sounds expensive for a lot of people these days, but that seems to be a lot of the gap is there's this resistance in an organization with legacy workforces, all of those things to how do we actually use this thing without laying everybody off or those things. And I don't think that that's what anybody wants to do. So I do also see that as sort of an emerging income stream for consulting firms is how do we take this new technology and add the human layer that lets that become operational.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And it kind of is bringing up a question. Alan, we talked about this when we were meeting one on one, but obviously from an investment perspective, similar to what Megan was saying, like everyone is moving in this direction. Everybody is bringing AI into their internal system as well as what they're offering. So I'm curious from an investor's perspective, and for any of our audience who might be considering selling their firm in the next couple of years, like how are you kind of weeding out the fluff versus who really has value, and are really building on a solid, firm foundation?
Mm.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And for us, it's about finding assets that might not be um, affectionately known as banked, right? Are they if they're have a banker and they're going to throw you into a competitive process, that makes it harder to get really close to the business fast enough, especially to get past the LOI phase, right? So if you really want to be competitive, you have to be able to make a bunch of really good assumptions and be, Colin Powell's rule, somewhere between 40% and 70% right. Because if you're trying to be 90% right, you're going to be, it's too late. Game's over. So I think, getting and pushing enough politely, working with the buy and sell side bankers to sit down and have a meal with those founders of those businesses and push past the formality as fast as possible to listen to the reality of the stories, look for specific examples of the ways they're impacting a client with an AI related solution. And as I mentioned earlier, what have they done to change the structural way they're operating themselves with real evidence, the kind of evidence Mark was citing earlier. What kind of efficiencies have you really seen by providing, an AI driven approach to doing the consulting work and the engineering for the client? Those two things have to be there just enough, or get to a point where we're all being honest with each other that it's not there, and that you're looking for us as the investor to help you get there with lower, as I mentioned in the breakout. We have to be willing to say we'll lower our EBITDA expectations of your business for a while, and even take some money off of our balance sheet because we believe in you to help you build it. But let's not pretend, right? So like, it's pretty easy to get there when you look for like a real case study and have a client conversation with their customer that they said they did it for. Um, but those are the kind of things I'd recommend for someone that wants to sell their business is revisit the back office, make sure you're using AI for your back office, as well as showing evidence of a couple of roles you've been able to pull out of a project because you used AI to serve a client and help them. And then, and then finally, if you haven't done those things, it's okay. Um, let's talk about how we can invest together.
That's great. Thank you. And yeah, I kind of want to flip the question to you, Mark, but I'm also, we've obviously gone through recent funding here at Project Works. And when we think about like the US market, we have a lot of competition. It's been really hard to differentiate and, we're still able to secure funding. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like in a world where it's very competitive right now and it's almost hard to identify that differentiation, what was your approach of communicating that with investors? And just what is your general kind of like perspective when it comes to stepping into a really competitive market right now and preparing to sell a firm?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I approach them differently. So like different audiences. So there might be three different audiences you just described there. One is an investor in Project Works or a potential investor in Project Works. How do I address them? Two is maybe the potential acquirer or investor in a services firm. And three, which I think you have to bring it all back to make it really work, is the audience being your clients and like what value are you really bringing to them and what is really different about what you offer them that should influence the other two, the buyer of your firm or the investor in your software firm. Um, but yeah, they're different games. It's a tricky time to raise money in software. For I can tell you just because I spent the first half of the year and the second half of last year doing that. And there are a lot of firms out there that can get from like 0 to 100 million in three years or something like that, or 2 years or 1 year now. And most firms are not in that category. Like, you hear about them, you see the headlines, you can maybe name three of them or five of them, but there's still 10,000 software firms out there. Most of them are not doing that. And so you have to be able to come up with a compelling story for how you're really going to differentiate in the long run. And how, because the other thing that I think is really fascinating is those companies. So you could take, like Replit is a good example, or one of the like Cursor, one of these kind of like AI development tool companies, and they're the ones that can get to like 100 million really quickly. I also think their moat or their barriers to entry are not there. So they got to 100 million quickly. I think they might get from 100 million to 50 million really quickly if somebody else has a slightly better mousetrap than they do. So part of our argument was what we're doing is central to the businesses we serve, and they're literally running their business on it. It's not that easy to get new businesses to come on. As you pointed out, there's other options. And actually, I think our biggest competitor is the inertia for people to make the change to move to running their company on a platform. But once they do, it's a really valuable platform for them and it becomes ingrained in how they operate. And they're very unlikely to just on a whim leave. Like, our retention rates are well above 90% because people just they get the value. And so it's a much more defensible, much more valuable long run business. And that was the argument that I had to go make. And um, have investors and potential investors go talk to our customers about that. But it's tricky. It is tricky because it is very sexy to see the headlines. And if you're an investor, say, I want to find a company that's going to get from 0 to 100 million in the next 2 years. Are you going to do that? And, we're not. Uh, so it's an interesting challenge for sure.
Mm. I think that it's changed. The market's changed a lot. The investment profile has changed a lot. So we sold a company in 2020 and they cared about year over year overall revenue growth. So they cared about, how fast did you scale? Like, were you Inc. 5000? Were you any of those things? Were you high growth? Were you fast growth? How fast are you hiring? And they really cared a lot about growth at the expense of EBITDA and some of the other pieces of it. And I think this year, if you're not profitable, it's going to be really, really hard to get funding or exit or any of those things because to Alan's point, there is so much fiscal conservatism because of the market instability that, if you want to sell next year or the year after, I really think to getting your back office in order and adding efficiency, but also looking at it, looking at where you can rejigger some of those metrics to put yourself in a better financial position. It just, which stinks because it's not like that's not the most fun. Like the high growth stuff is sometimes stinks in a different way, but the
Right.
high growth stuff is sometimes the fun pieces of
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
But I don't. I'm sure you can speak to it better, Alan, than we've had.
No, yeah, yeah, you're doing a great job covering it, really. You know, I think the trick is that if you really want to get top dollar or premium multiples right now, you kind of got to do both, right? You really need to be able
Hmm.
to do both, um, which is a tall order, especially for a services business. Um, again, especially for what we would characterize as subscale. Again, that's typically less than 10 million in revenue, less than 2 million in EBITDA. Those are businesses where typically the founders are still out selling or delivering in some way. There's not necessarily yet a fully scalable team behind you as founders to you don't have a lot of those proof points, and so it's a tall order to do both of those things. Hopefully, AI is an enabler for some of that. And Mark talked earlier about who's breaking through, and I think about that for tech services. and who's breaking through on the top line, they're rarely also breaking through on the bottom line. Rarely. Super tough. So again, you can still sell your business. You just have to be willing to accept a lower multiple, perhaps, than you had in your mind, your head, heart, and your gut for your family. So I think about the other dimension of it, of course, is that there's trillions of dollars in the market just dying to put money to work. And
Yeah.
so if you have even remotely a decent asset that you've built over 5 to 7 years, and that window is even shrinking, like you can actually build a business in 2 years and sell it now versus that was like unheard of not long ago. So there's a lot of money that people are dying to put to work. So the competition, especially for those great assets, like even a solid asset, is very high. Um, and PE has gone from a cottage industry to its own industry itself, as an example. And they're actually talking about dialing back restrictions in the public market to make it easier to go public again, so that there's another channel besides private equity or strategic to sell your company. Like
Mm.
there's so much opening up, and now universities are investing in small businesses as well to help them get started, either competing with venture or private equity in a way as well. So there's so many channels for money. And so if you're building even remotely a good business, you stand a really good chance. But the discipline of, I think, of course, I'm a hardware sales guy, so I think about like, what are you doing to build an organic sales machine? Like that's got to be it. And that was Mark's brilliance as well at Nexient was kind of ignore everything else. Like we're gonna sell. Let's drive sales, build a good company, drive organic sales, and acquire new clients, and the rest takes care of itself in a lot of ways. So it's a bit back to the
Yeah.
basics in a way too.
Thanks, I do.
Yeah, revenue fixes a lot of problems.
It sure does. It can mask others, but that's
Yeah.
okay. Oh.
Mhm.
Mm.
I'm kind of curious to like zoom it back to some, back into the firms themselves. So that was super interesting to think about like that bigger picture perspective. But for Megan and Alan specifically, I'm curious if either of you have had an experience where maybe within your firm or a firm that you've served, you've experienced like a negative backfire of implementing AI. And I'm curious if
Mm.
you actually have an example of that. Because once again, we have so much theory, but have you guys actually seen that happen
Mm.
firsthand?
Mm.
Yeah, I can do one for a client, and that side. So one of the things so to Mark's point around like how do you attach yourself to a larger enterprise, but also have something new to build out. So automated workflows is something that ServiceNow does really well. They've been moving into sort of that operational technology, so connected devices and sort of that, a lot of great experience, and a lot of great winning use cases about uptime and those pieces. But I do think this is where having true consulting and understanding all of the nuances and those pieces come in. We had one client that came in, they wanted us to come and replace re-implement a project that they had been doing. They wanted to do operational technology in Europe for energy utilities and that side. And what ended up happening is actually they spent and they got sort of mired in European energy regulatory commissions. And so they were mired for like 7 months in approvals because of the language model and the security nuances around sort of, is this allowed in the EU? Is this not allowed in the EU? And so I actually do think that and it took a long time and they spent a lot of money without seeing a whole lot of success there. And I think part of that is just you actually have to, because the problems are different and because the problems are a little bit more complicated, you really have to have a team that understands the nuances of the business model they're trying to sell, because there's more things that can surprise you. There's much more. I think the CISO is becoming much more powerful today on that. What are the guardrails for where my language model is going? How is it going to be used? I just think even just I would say, you know, the number of questions that we get now on data privacy in an RFP or in a client onboarding, it used to be a couple, do you have a privacy
Mm.
policy? How do you share your emails? And now it is like a 17 page document that you like, and what are your insurance levels and all those things. And so I do think if you want to, it's absolutely the right thing to get into these new emerging spaces, but make sure you have experts that know what they're advising on, because I think there are more gotchas when you're trying to connect to different external systems than maybe you would initially think.
That is true. That's why we started up Koenig Cyber Solutions a little bit from scratch-ish, right, to be able to serve our clients as a separate business unit from the other one that we own, Vervent, right now. Um, so that you're right on the money. We think that's a huge space, especially when we think about things like CMMC certification for manufacturers that serve the DoD or the DOW now. And there's that kind of aspect of cyber that is pervasive. You're absolutely correct. Data governance and all those things are there. But I believe that for me, Jenna, the question was, where have we seen an AI fail? Maybe. Yeah. I think it relates a little bit to Paul Selway's comment out there in the chat or question, the inverse of what I wasn't sure what Paul was saying there. And if it's the Paul Selway, I know. Hi, Paul. The the uh, the thing that has happened with us that isn't awesome is like using AI to generate some consulting content quickly to serve a client, and then maybe not reading it yourself very well, and then presenting it to the client as if you wrote it. That's the kind of stuff that where work acceleration can go very badly. And people really need to, as I mean, Mark's building software that's going to write RFP responses, I think, right? Mark, you were talking about that
Mhm.
earlier. You guys are going to build software that does that. We have to have people with head on a swivel more than ever before, because a lot of this stuff can be, if I didn't write it myself, am I really ingesting it in me, right? To then serve the client, right? Am I really doing that as a consultant or a salesperson? And so we have to be different now in not necessarily great writers, but great editors and ingesters of other information that's written by AI, and that goes uh, can go very badly because clients really want to believe that you wrote it, even though they know you didn't. You know, they know you didn't. Now but they need to believe you did. So be ready, read your stuff, and practice it in the mirror since you didn't write it yourself. It's just again, I keep going back to some of the basics in this call. So maybe that's not as interesting to some people, but it's like that, right? You can really screw up a deal if you're not ready with your own AI generated consulting and you don't know it.
I had I was in a roundtable with a group of engineering firm leaders, and very basic problem, which I'd kind of heard about but didn't know was real. So what he said happened to his company was one of the people in finance working from home using the consumer chat GPT version uploaded some sensitive financial information about the company. And then another person in their company did some sort of query about the company, and that the information came back to them. So it got put into the model, and like you need to use a paid subscription. You need to be clear about whichever model you're using, like what are they doing with the data? Because in this case, they had this real problem. Their financials got basically thrown into, it's like, to the web, to whoever happens to ask about them. Yeah.
Ugh,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
I
That's
would
a
say,
yeah.
Alan, to that point that you had earlier about like the writers and that side, we used to talk a little bit in optimization about how best practices ultimately become not the best, because when everything sort of, converts to a norm, to a homogenized piece or that side, there's nothing that actually stands out. And so we actually hired real writers, like journalists, who absolutely leverage AI for baselines and research and first drafts and all of those things. But there is a differentiated component that I really believe in. Mark was talking about how you educate your consumers and that side. At the moment, somebody told me, I think it was Chief Strategy Officer of ServiceNow, Nick Cison, said like at the moment AI is like a very smart sixth grader, which is great. Like there's a lot of things that AI can then do, but it doesn't understand voice or context or messaging very well yet. And so if you're writing for an executive audience, if you're writing for an enterprise audience, you can't. I have had found, or investors backing us, and well, why don't you just, launch 50 blogs in a day or that side. One, like the SEO and the AIO, and that doesn't work with that. But the second is, I always think about customer acquisition as a journey, right? But you never know where they are on that relay race with you, and you never know what the entry point is that they might, which is the first time they're ever going to talk to you. And most of the time it's online. Most of the time it's your digital content. And so you need that unique piece to speak peer to peer to whoever your ICP is, whoever your target client is. And if that's just AI written, if it's just you did it to check a box to do a thing, it's not going to get you what you want out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recently heard a podcast from the CEO of Webflow, and he was talking a lot about just the way that SEO and AIO is changing so drastically. And his number one recommendation was like, write it by hand first and then use ChatGPT, because basically what's happening is ChatGPT is actually creating articles to prove its point. Like you ask it a question and it doesn't have proof points, so it develops an article that proves its point. And so things are just getting lost in the noise. So similar to what you said, Megan, like if everyone's
Becomes
going
circular.
that, it
Yeah.
goes circular, and like
Mm,
all of a sudden everything
mm,
will start sounding the same, and also it will rank lower. We don't know yet. This isn't proven, but it's predicted. Anything that comes from a chat GBT article that itself created will rank lower. And so it's going to start pushing your content further down. And
Mm.
so
mm,
I found
mm.
that super interesting. And also, like,
That's
Google can
fascinating.
actually tell
Mm,
what is written by a human versus what's written by AI. And I know I personally, as I'm looking at content, my mind checks out when I see certain articles. And my hypothesis is it's written by AI. You can tell when something doesn't have a human touch to it. So,
mm. Yeah, that's really well said. And I think that's why for us, we're becoming increasingly obsessed with this what we're calling the hype model, which is different than the hype that Andy had on his slide, but like the human AI partnership. It just has to be beyond human in the loop. It has to be a partnership. And if we're not thinking of it that way, or helping our clients think of it that way, it's going to be a mess for all the reasons just described here,
mm,
for sure.
yeah. Um, Amazing. So Megan, I wanted to kind of wrap up on one question with you, and then I'll do a closing question for all of us. But this has been in the chat for a while, and I think it's actually really important because, yeah, as we think about building a culture and everything that you talked about in culture shifts, like what are some practical steps that you feel leaders can take to ensure that their team's culture remains strong and adaptive, especially in a time when a lot of people are anxious and resistant to trying out new technologies?
Yeah, so I think Alan said earlier, you've talked about basics a couple times, and I really do think it comes down to the basics of, what is good leadership, what is good interpersonal communication, and all of those things. So I think one, we were just talking about, using AI to write emails or content. Like, in the critical pieces for your critical relationships, clients or employees or that side, don't phone it in. Don't just use an AI piece and think that that's good enough for that side. Take the time to, if you're celebrating somebody or that side, take the time to actually do a handwritten note or those pieces, because that will actually stand out so much more. I did think I think imbue time for learning and training and testing into your team's productive utilization or that side. So if we want to train everybody into this into AI, um, then we need to let them, if you're anxious, if you're resistant, I think having, and it's not just like, hey, go learn AI, but what kind of training modules or that side are you investing in to make sure that they understand that? And then even do you have like peer-to-peer mentorship groups or that side? A lot of times, but we differently, but as we pull people into a new organization, we're creating a buddy program. And so like you have a human to human that is about your peer cohort that you can ask questions about, learn from training or that side. We also do it as we grow talent. So we have an academy program, and they have a mentor that helps teach them sort of, because today it's, you're not, at least my opinion is, in some any kind of consulting, I think you're not just teaching the technology skills, because I think a lot of times if we do exactly what a client asked us to do when they come to us, then we've somehow failed them because they are looking for somebody that sees something that they don't see, or and is enabled, empowering them to build something that they couldn't build themselves. So I think training your teams on not just here's how you use a language model, but also like here's how you implement it in an organization. Here's how you check the testing to make sure that there's not, hallucinated data, or, I remember somebody on a floor one day telling me that they had actually accidentally somehow loaded their demo data into their language model. And so they were getting these queries that would skew like Cinderella and Mickey Mouse into like like an actual data set or that side. And so you absolutely, I think, also have it, and again, training the management layer to understand where people have a tendency to phone it in, and making sure that they're doing sort of that spot check or have skip level conversations or any of those things. So those are two or three. The other thing I would say is as you scale, um, your culture, your values go from sort of like oral history. So what do we write down? And it's usually about 50 or 100 people or that side where you really want to have a true culture code. And I think my opinion is it shouldn't be written from the top down and sort of imbue, like pushed down to the team, just like great sales conversations, just like anything else. You want people to see themselves reflected in it. So I would have a meeting, like, ideally in person, but that side where we talk about what our culture is. And who do we want to be? And I think Gary's talking about, like we have to focus more on being humans. That means who you are as a culture is going to become even more important. That humility, like we aren't smarter than other people. And in fact, like the vast majority of research is now out there and available. So our differentiation is how do we go about doing the business? And so doing any kind of business. And so making sure that everybody understands what our mores are, what our norms are, and what do we believe in is really important. And I guess one more point, just because I think you're always living that, is it's not just what you write down. I read something the other day that your culture is actually what you allow to exist in your organization. And I think that that's sometimes different. So, like what we say is we ascribe to excellence and we always, we treat everybody with humility or whatever those pieces are. Then make sure that you have people that actually display and embody that humility every day, because otherwise that's not your culture. It's a word on a slide that people don't believe anymore.
Mm. So good. One of my favorite activities that I used to do in like building out a new culture was you create the values and then it's about the questions that you ask your leaders, right? It's like, okay, one of our core values is experimentation. You have this problem. How are you going to bring experimentation into it? Or how are you going to bring humility into it? So it really is the way that you infuse it into problem solving too. So
Yeah.
um, that's phenomenal. And I'm curious, Mark, if you have anything to add to that, because I know that's something you really emphasize is experimentation. So what do you think about, kind of promoting a culture of curiosity within the workforce right now when a lot of people are feeling, maybe afraid to be trying new things or even afraid of if their role is going to be in existence in 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, we talked about this in the breakout room that I was in. That I think, well, first off, I think culture, like your team watches what you do much more than what you say. And so, as leaders, we need to be willing to try things and be embarrassed in public by learning along the way. So, we did a thing which I wanted to try vibe coding, and I had just recently heard this story about the data getting into ChatGPT. So I was just asking inside our company, like, do we have a corporate subscription to a vibe coding platform? And if so, which one? And can I try it? And that launched into this whole thing where we didn't, and we had to go get one. And the cool thing that came out of it is we went to Replit, we got a trial basically with unlimited tokens, and they let us open it up to the whole company. So not just I was like going to try vibe coding something, but like we just said, hey, everybody in the company, you have till the end of the month, unlimited tokens, go for it. It was an amazing process that we all were like out there trying to figure out how to do this. I think we got like between 15 and 20 apps, some of which are customer facing, some of which are internal use, but just I think because I was willing to sort of say, I don't know how to do this, I don't know what tool to use, I want to try it. Like it wound up that a bunch of us got to try it and created some really cool things. So yeah, so I think what you do is more important than what you say, and I think most people are not expert in this stuff. Like 99% of people are not expert in this stuff. So as leaders, we need to model learning. And learning involves being like asking dumb questions and doing things that don't work and just do that in public. It's a little humbling,
Mm,
but it gets other people to do it too.
yeah, for sure.
And I think as we're talking about, again, digital world and those pieces, I think more and more there is less of that sort of coffee talk and those pieces where you kind of organically get to know people on that side. And I don't there are ways to replace it, and there's rewards and structures on that side, but I also think pay attention to the people that your high performers that you want to grow, and I think put them in rooms that maybe they haven't even thought of being in rooms for yet, or that side. So give them stretch projects, ask them what else they want for their career and those pieces. And awesome if it also has AI in it. But I think, people have talked about that, like that trajectory of like, your career evolution is like, God, I want to be in that room. I'm so excited I'm in this, like, God, I want to be in that meeting. I'm so excited I'm in this meeting. And then I will do many things legal and several illegal to avoid this meeting or that side. But I do think that sometimes as we get more senior, you forget how much you want to be in that room. And I think that great cultures give people opportunities to be in those rooms that maybe they hadn't thought of. So let people shadow projects or those pieces, because I really do think that that's how you grow the next generations of leaders. And
Hmm.
that's going to be really, really critical.
Yeah, for sure. I found myself we were doing a strategy session in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Yeah, just yesterday, and we invited in a broad base of the Vervent team to get together and work on this stuff together. And I found myself asking a lot of questions. And I think the risk, to your point, a little bit, Megan, is like if we're senior people showing up in the room asking a lot of questions, there's a risk that like, wait, you're supposed to have the strategy already. Like, no, actually, we're working on this together, you know? And then then the other risk of asking questions is, well, wait, is he trying to guide us with his question? Actually, no, it's actually just not a loaded question. I just want to know what you guys think. So really hitting that stuff between the eyes is what I'm saying. Like be super direct. Like you talked about that, Mark. Like I'm going to ask a stupid question now, right? And that's okay. Like create that permission and that openness that we're going to wrestle with this together. And then as Lencioni often talks about, like right, be willing to be a chief repeating officer because just saying that once or acting that way once will never work. You know,
Mm,
you got to do it a lot over a lot of years to have it sink in.
yeah, I like that.
So good. Well, this has been a powerful session, you guys. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your knowledge and your wisdom. Um, I just want to close it out with one final question. So I'm curious from each of you, for all of our leaders out there that are going to they're probably in the process of planning for 2026, or if they're going to be meeting with their board anytime soon. What piece of advice would you give them in regards to shifting in 2026, based on everything that we've been discussing today?
I would say take some risks. Like really think about what isn't working and throw some crazy ideas out there that are a little bit risky to address it head on. That's kind of how I think about it. And
I'm
that's yeah.
actually I'm going to use a quote that Mark, you told me we had dinner about maybe a month or two ago. And I thought one of the more brilliant pieces of advice is because everyone's trying to figure this out, right? And so I think you said that you used to walk into some investment rooms and say, so here are the reasons why you might fire me this year or this week or that side. But I think you should look at your business and think about, here are the reasons we might go out of business next year. Either, like that barrier to entry or any of those things. Like, what are the things that are going to be massive competitive threats, whether it's technology, whether it's people, whether it's, actually business strategy and ideal customer markets. And then what do we need to do to make sure that we come away the winner instead of the loser in whatever that battle might be? And then back out how the heck you fund that. But
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that at the company level. Yeah, I think when I first became a CEO, somebody said most CEOs are fired. So think about each month, like why you might be fired next month and fix it now. Like, so similar, like
Right,
I like the
right.
way you're like mapping that to the
Mhm.
company. Like, why would you go out of business?
Yeah, if Jennifer, if your question is a little bit about what do you say to your board, what are you saying to your investors, that kind of thing, I think it is a bit of a mix of both of these things, which is like be really, really honest about um, what you're faced with and the experiments you believe you need to take, or you won't be in existence, or it's existential in some way. So you're convincing of your board that you need them with you to take the risk, right? So I think that's really important. And then I also think about having a basic framework in place. I'm a big fan of EOS, the Entrepreneur's Operating System, as a basic framework. Yeah, just something that keeps you anchored in 90-day cycles so you can pivot.
Mhm.
Those are the things I think a lot about. And like if you can do experiments in 90 days, learn from them and then pivot again and set reset a new set of goals for the following 90. It's just a basic structure that holds yourself accountable. You'll go a lot further faster, I think. And then that's an easier way to communicate with the company through a framework as well, right, Megan? You know?
Absolutely.
So good. Amazing. Well, Megan, Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this was extremely valuable for everyone tuning in, and yeah, super grateful to have your wisdom today. So thanks for your time. I
Hmm.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. A lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. And
Hang out with good friends and talk about curious ideas. Fabulous.
Totally.
Yeah,
Every day.
So good.
also natural. I was like, you
I
made
love
my
it.
job easy.
That was so fun. Yeah, thank you.